Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am truly delighted to welcome you all to this important session on keeping AI on track. As a television journalist who recently embarked on a thrilling yet demanding journey of launching a new TV show, I initially felt a wave of hesitation when the World Economic Forum extended their invitation for me to moderate this session. The prospect of balancing my own program with the responsibility of exploring this significant topic was a bit worrying, particularly given my status as an enthusiastic learner rather than an expert in the field. Nonetheless, the reason I could embrace this opportunity rested largely in the reliable support I knew I would receive from my AI assistant. I affectionately regard this assistant as she, a reflection of the remarkable partnership we share. While I was busy watching previous lectures of my guest on YouTube, she was efficiently summarizing numerous academic papers that have helped me shape today's talk. This collaboration not only enabled my presence here today, but also deepened my understanding of the capabilities and future of AI, themes I am eager to incorporate creatively in my television work later on. However, the rapid progression in AI development also presents all of us with compelling questions. As AI continues to advance, what are the implications if such capabilities could ultimately substitute our roles altogether? This represents a profound and thought-provoking dilemma facing organizations, economies, and individuals alike. At this juncture, we are merely beginning to chart these possibilities, with critical decisions looming on the horizon at various societal and institutional levels. I am thrilled to share the stage with Professor Eric Brynjolfsson, who is the Jerry Yang and Akiko Yamazaki Professor and Senior Fellow at the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI and Director of the Stanford Digital Economy Lab. Thank you all for being here, and I look forward to an engaging and insightful discussion. Welcome, everyone, and Professor, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Zaina. It is such a pleasure to be here and have a chance to share some of the research we've been doing at Stanford, at the Stanford Digital Economy Lab, my company WorkHelix. And let me start with a little bit of a discussion starter that Andy McAfee and I like to use at dinner sometimes. You can use this when you go home and with your friends. We ask, what were the most important things that ever happened in the world? Now, that's a big question, and you get people giving all sorts of answers. Some people will talk about empires and conquests, natural resource discoveries or discoveries of whole new continents, kings and queens. And there's no real way to resolve what was the most important thing, but I'm an economist, and one thing you can do is actually measure how much the average person changed. And if you look at, say, GDP per capita, what you see is that, nothing much happened for century after century, millennia after millennia. The average person lived very close to subsistence level. Their families did, their grandparents did, their great-great-grandparents did. So all these other things hardly made a difference in their daily lives. Until, at one point, boom, things started really taking off. What was that? Well, the Watt steam engine was invented in the late 1700s. And after that, things really changed for most people. Our lives are so different than those 50 or 100 or 200 years ago. We have about 50 times greater GDP per capita on average than our ancestors did couple hundred years ago. So I would argue that the most important thing was a technology, the Watt steam engine, that ignited the Industrial Revolution and started this upward arc that's still growing exponentially. The Watt steam engine was the first really important general purpose technology. We would call it a GPT, and I would argue that AI is a GPT. I know you're thinking, oh wait, like GPT-4? No, that's generative pre-trained transformer. I'm very annoyed that we economists, we used to just say GPT and have it be general purpose technology, but the AI folks have stolen that acronym. But I'm still going to use it in both ways. AI is both kinds. It is a general purpose technology like the steam engine because it has these three important characteristics. It's pervasive, it can be improved over time, and it spawns complementary innovations. There are other GPTs. Electricity is a GPT, the internal combustion engine. But I think AI is a particularly important GPT. It's the GPT of our era, and you could say that it's the most general of all general purpose technologies. And the reason for that is, well, this guy, Demis Hassabis, just got the Nobel Prize last week. He's the co-founder of DeepMind. If you go visit his offices in King's Cross in London, they have a little motto there. Our goal is to solve intelligence and then use that to solve all the other problems in the world. So that's their little mission statement. I'm sure your company and your country have a mission as well. Maybe it's an equally modest mission as this one. It does sound ambitious, but in a way it's true, isn't it? If you could solve intelligence, you could do so much for the environment. You could do so much to address poverty, healthcare. So many other problems in the world could be helped if we could do better on intelligence. So in that sense, it's not just one of the general purpose technologies, it may be the most important, the final and ultimate general purpose technology. And that's what we're addressing right now is these general purpose technologies that AI is transforming the world. These are the ones that drive the arc of improvement. And what Andy McAfee and I think is that just as the steam engine helped power our muscles, we now have technologies that power our brains, our minds, and they'll be even more important in terms of accelerating economic growth and productivity. Now, part of the reason I'm excited is not just that this technology is available, but what we see is that it's rapidly improving. So here's some data from the AI Index, a report we put out at Stanford every year. It's about 520 pages. This is the latest one. And it's filled with charts like this. And what you see is a lot of lines going up and to the right. They kind of stretch it out on the screen, so they don't look quite as steep as they did on my original slide, but they're still pretty steep. And what they're going for is from, 20, 30, 60% up to much higher levels of performance. 100% is actually the level of humans at doing those same tasks, whether it's image recognition or competition level mathematics. Not only are they going up, but it seems to be like it's happening faster and faster. So we are rapidly getting machines in more and more specific tasks that are able to do as well as humans. That dotted line is really important because it's a threshold. It's almost like phase transition when like water turns into steam. When you cross that threshold, it's a fundamental change because when a machine can do things better than a human, then if you're an entrepreneur or a manager or a policymaker, you're going to start switching things over from human to machine. And that transition can have huge effects on the economy. And it's happening in more and more categories. There's still, don't worry, there's still a lot of things that we humans are better at, but there are many where machines are actually more successful, and that number is increasing greatly rapidly. So the obvious question, or the one that I get asked most often, is does this lead to the end of work? Are the machines going to replace us all? And that's an important question. Even other folks, like this Nobel Prize winner, a different Nobel Prize winner last week, also got his AI Nobel Prize, Jeff Hinton. He's kind of the father of AI. He developed some of the technologies that led to all those upward sloping lines like deep learning. He had some thoughts about this. He was looking at how they could read medical images. And back in 2016, he said, hey, it's obvious that machines are better than radiologists. So we don't need radiologists anymore. We should stop training them. Maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, but it's clear that's obvious. So he said that, 8 years ago. So what's been happening to radiologists? Has the number been going down? Has it been going flat? What's been going on? Well, if you look at the data, I'm a data-driven kind of guy, whoa, it's going up. The demand for radiologists has been going up since that time. In fact, it's tripled over this short period from 1,000 job postings to 3,000 job postings, and many other data sets give similar messages. So that's not what Jeff Hinton was expecting. It's not what a lot of people were expecting. Yes, it's true that AI can read medical images, but when you talk to hospitals, they actually can't get enough radiologists. They need more of them. So what's going on? What's driving that? Well, the key thing is that AI is an amazing technology, but technology is just the beginning. You need to do a lot more transformation of work to really get the benefits. And in particular, you need to think about all the tasks that are being done. In my view, it's not the job that is the atomic unit of work, it's the task. So a job is a bundle of different tasks, like a radiologist does many different tasks, economist does different tasks, bus driver, they all do different tasks, not just one thing. You can take all those tasks and then you can score each of the individual tasks. AI can help with some of them, and there's other ones that can't help at all. AI can help with reading medical images. It doesn't help with lifting boxes. Once you've scored them, you can then roll them back up to the job level, but maybe weight them by how much time the person spends on it or how much wage is associated with it. And you can even roll them up to a whole company, or I should add, you could roll it up to a whole city or country as well. And then you get a sense of where the tasks are that are going to be affected by AI. This is the work that I've been doing with Daniel Rock and with Tom Mitchell, and we've been trying to understand which tasks will be most affected by AI and then how that's affecting jobs and work. It's not the whole, and what we found was there was not a single job where AI just runs the table and is able to do everything. In each case, AI was able to help with some tasks and not others. And there's not a single job where AI had no effect either. Let's go back to our radiology example. So according to ONET from the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the United States, there are about 27 distinct tasks that radiologists do. One of them is interpreting images. And that's what Jeff Hinton was talking about, reading the images and interpreting. Is this cancer? Is this emphysema? But they do other things. For instance, sometimes they have to administer conscious sedation. Now, I don't know about you, but I would not want an AI, a machine, to come in and give me sedation. No, I want a human to be involved in that. And if you go through the 27 different tasks, what you find is that AI helps with some, but others, you really need a human involved. And that's one of the reasons why we had more demand for radiologists is that, yes, AI is helping, but you still need to keep a human in the loop. In fact, you still need to keep a human in charge. And in general, not for every occupation, but for most of them, what we see is this pattern where you want to have humans involved, even as parts of their tasks are being done by AI more and more. If you go through the whole economy, there's a study done by Daniel Rock and a team at OpenAI, and what they found was that about 80% of the jobs have at least 10% of their tasks that will be affected by AI. So almost every job has some significant parts that are affected. And 19%, almost a fifth of them, had 50% or more that are affected. And those tended to be the more high-paying jobs. A lot of jobs like doctors, like radiologists, like lawyers, those are ones that often required or had the opportunity for a lot of AI to be helping them. So we're seeing this big transformation happening in work. So what should you do tomorrow morning? Well, whether you're a CEO or manager or CTO or policymaker, there's two pieces of advice. First off, you need to develop a plan. You have to figure out where is AI going to be affecting you, and do that not at the occupation or the whole company level. Go down to the task level. What individual tasks can AI do, and then add them all up. And that's what we did in our studies. You can go to our papers and see that. Once you've identified where those opportunities are, then you need to be ruthless about tracking them. I think that the time for experimentation is over. This is not just a time to be playing around with the technologies. You need to be looking at ways to deliver real business value, real economic value, real value for your countries. And that's doable. There's a lot of examples of that being done very successfully. So go ahead and track the progress and make sure you're doing it. Both those goals can be achieved if you pursue the task-based approach, breaking things down to these individual tasks. And that's going to be a strategy going forward where we can shorten that time from invention of amazing technologies towards delivering better productivity, shortening the gap from technology to productivity. So ultimately, I'm optimistic that we will be able to use these technologies to have dramatic changes in the world, boost GDP, boost unmeasured health and environmental benefits as well. And the key to that is not just great technologies, but transforming work with the task-based approach. Thanks very much. So I think we're going to have a discussion, a little bit of time. Oh, here comes some chairs. A little time for discussion, maybe some Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for a very insightful presentation. I'd like also to welcome our audiences and ask them to please feel free to raise their hands if they feel they have a follow-up question to a question I asked the professor, or if they have any comment at any point in time. We're all partnering in this session. Let me start, Professor, by asking you if you believe we have enough research that is being done by economists to understand really the economic consequences of AI?
Well, that's a great question. And I have to say that there's this amazing gap that's emerging right now, that's growing right now. My friends in computer science are improving the technology. There's more hardware, there's more funding. There's some great, very smart people like Demis and Jeff, and here we have Stuart Russell and others that are dramatically improving our capabilities. At the same time, our organizations, our institutions, our laws, and most fundamentally our economic understanding is not improving very rapidly. In fact, in some ways, it's not improving at all. And that gap between the technological capabilities and what we actually understand is getting bigger and bigger as the technologies get better. So we need to close that gap, and specifically what we need to do is invest more in economic and sociology and policy and public policy research to understand better what are the implications for society, because it's dangerous to have that gap. That gap is where most of our big problems and challenges of the next 10 years are going to be, also where most of our big opportunities to make the world better are going to be.
Professor, you mentioned radiology and radiologists. Yep. Are all jobs augmentable?
Not all jobs are augmentable, but more than most people think. Too many CEOs, when I talk to them, or policymakers, the first place they go is AI should automate this job, or AI is going to automate that. And it's true that sometimes AI can automate instead of augment, but usually the bigger opportunities are for augmenting, for using AI to make the job better and to increase what people can do. Sometimes there are things that we can largely replace what's happening, but I think the big wins are in keeping humans in the loop and using AI to add to creativity, to add to quality, allow people to do their jobs better. And that's where people should be focusing more of their attention.
Do we have any real-life studies on other jobs other than radiologists that have presented or produced actual numbers on how much productivity, efficiency was?
Yeah, well, I've been involved in a number of these studies as part of my research. Let me tell you about one of them. In call centers, we were lucky that there was a kind of a natural experiment where a company rolled out a new call center technology based on Cresta technology, actually. And some people got access to it. It was for call centers, and some operators got access to it and some didn't. So you could kind of compare them one against these others, almost like an experiment. And what we found was that the people who had access to the technology very rapidly improved in their performance, up to about 35% improvement for many of them. Interestingly, the customers were happier. If you got the customer satisfaction surveys, or if you looked at the transcripts, you could see the customer sentiment, how many happy words and how many angry words there were, and the sentiment improved dramatically. And last but not least, the employees also seemed to be happier. There was less turnover in the employees, so they seemed to like helping the customers more. And all this happened within just about 4 to 5 months. So it was a very rapid improvement. There have been other studies of coding, writing software that are similar, management consulting, sales. So there's more and more evidence about the potential performance effects.
Professor, you said that every manager, every CEO should wake up and do some mapping of his organization,
Yes.
understand where to introduce AI. Can this not be a bit overwhelming with all these advances?
It is overwhelming, and so when we did our first paper, I mean, we have a research team, and we went through and we analyzed them by hand. Now there's software available. I've got a startup called WorkHelix that does that in an automated way, and there's ways you can do it a lot faster. But I really think you need to be data-driven. I mean, the alternative is to kind of do it with gut and instinct, listen to anecdotes and stories, and I think the time for that is past. If you do this data-driven, task-based approach, you're able to identify the opportunities, and there's evidence for which ones work and which ones don't. And then you can make decisions when all the different people in your organization are saying, oh, you know, we need AI here, we need AI there, and the vendors are coming in, and there's stories in the newspaper. You can't make sense of all that without this kind of data-driven approach and going with the task level.
Professor, will we need to be ready for serious organizational and managerial new models?
Yes. I think that the next 5 to 10 years are going to be a period of tremendous business transformation, the biggest business transformation we've ever seen. And there are going to be new trillion-dollar companies created. There are going to be some other big companies that are wiped out through this turbulence and this transformation. The technology is just the tip of the iceberg of a much bigger transition. New business processes, new ways of reaching customers, new core technologies, new goods and services. And right now, a lot of people, entrepreneurs, managers, and companies are inventing them. Policymakers need to be watching this and preparing their workforce for this massive transformation going forward.
Professor, if we're talking about growth and productivity regained due to this powered business with AI, are we going to witness some slowdown before we see some growth? Are we going to lose jobs before we gain jobs?
So I think technology has always been destroying jobs, has always been creating jobs at the same time. So we have this transition. One thing that definitely doesn't work is try to freeze everything in place and just say, we're going to leave all the same jobs the way they always are. The successful companies, the successful countries have always had a dynamism to them and a transition. But there can also be, sometimes paradoxically, a bit of a productivity slowdown before it takes off. This is something I call the productivity J curve. It can look a little bit like a J, a little down and then up. And the reason it looks like a J is that in that initial period, companies are doing that transformation. They're developing new business processes. They're reskilling the workforce. These are creating intangible assets, but they're not measured anywhere. And so all that effort doesn't show up as greater output. But once they have new processes and figured out how to use the technology, then you have a takeoff. But that early period can be very discouraging while you're waiting to see if you can get things working correctly. These J curves have appeared with other technologies, and we're seeing them appearing with AI as well.
Since you're mentioning measuring,
Yes.
measurement, how do you measure productivity that is the result of cognitive work?
Yeah. That's one of the hardest things. Physical work is often easier to measure. You know, if a person is laying bricks, you can count them. If a person's, coming up with new ideas, how do you know if they're really coming up with new ideas, working at it? Some people try to do things like measuring lines of code, and I think that's a very bad proxy. But you do need to have these KPIs, these key performance indicators. In the case of the call center, for instance, I gave you the examples of productivity call center volume, customer satisfaction, employee turnover. Every company has a lot of data about how their operations are going, and you can tap into that data and with APIs and then turn those into KPIs. At my company, WorkHelix, we call it APIs for KPIs. It's a way of knowing what's happening in the company and then getting these key performance indicators. You can even do it at the whole economy level. We have a new metric called GDP GDP that measures the benefits, not just the costs. And that is also helping to understand some of the intangibles and the cognitive labor. But as the economy transitions through this business transformation, we can't just rely on the old metrics. Traditional GDP is wonderful, but it's missing many parts of the economy that are very important. And so the new KPIs, the new metrics are needed. And part of the CEOs or managers or policymakers' job is to think hard about these new metrics and implement them.
Professor, how important is it to have even small and medium businesses on board?
Yeah, these technologies help create new ecosystems for big companies and smaller companies. Often the smaller companies are the ones that are first to embrace some of these technologies, and there's a transition that goes on. I like to see the big companies also adapt them, but sometimes it's slower. It's harder for a big company to transition, so you see startups adopting them. But it's ultimately a whole ecosystem of different size companies.
Do you fear industrial concentration in the hands of the big corporations?
I do. I think that one of my concerns is that these technologies could be used to centralize decision-making and centralize power, and that might be more efficient in some ways, but it also could be dangerous in terms of economic concentration and ultimately concentration of wealth and power. And I think most of us would prefer to see a world of widely distributed decision-making. But we have to work towards that.
Professor, you showed us that a chart with the 100%, the boiling level, the human level.
Yeah.
This, if I may call it, obsession of having AI that is perfectly imitating humans.
Right.
Is this too ambitious on our part or not ambitious enough on our part?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And while AI is getting very good at individual tasks, I think it's a mistake to think of there just being one dimension of intelligence and say that like once AI gets to human level, that's it. The reality is that intelligence is multidimensional. That chart had many different lines. And humans are better at some already. A pocket calculator is better than me at doing arithmetic. Bats can do echolocation, and chimpanzees, believe it or not, have better short-term memory. So there's many different kinds of, than humans. There are many different kinds of intelligence. And if we use a machine, if we think of a machine trying to imitate a human perfectly, which is sometimes called the Turing test of intelligence, I think that's much too narrow a focus for AI. It will make AI that doesn't exceed humans in many of the ways that it could be exceeding it, and also tends to replace humans. A better approach is to have AI that does new things, in particular does things that humans are not good at, and then we each have our strengths. We can have humans do the things that we're good at, taking care of kids and talking to each other and interacting, and machines do what they're good at, optimizing a route or doing some other things. And they each play to their strengths instead of working so hard to have AI imitate humans. I call this the Turing Trap, this idea of having a machine that tries to perfectly imitate humans. Instead, we should have AI that does new and different things.
Professor, let me ask, I'm looking always for hands.
You just raise your hand if you have a question.
Questions?
Yeah.
Okay, if you see anyone raising their hands, just...
Don't be shy, there's a few people
Yes,
there. Okay.
please.
Right in the front. Yeah.
Thank you. So Professor, robotic process automation is over a decade old, and even that hasn't really been adopted widely to replace a lot of tasks that could be easily replaced. Why do we believe that AI is going to do better than RPA?
Yeah. So I think there's so much hype about AI, and there's a lot of nonsense out there where AI is not appropriate. There's also real opportunities for AI that are paying off. And the real job for all of us is to distinguish the hype from the reality. It makes me so sad when companies spend billions of dollars on failed projects and industries are wasting their money. But whether it's RPA or other kinds of software, there are use cases where it does work well. Maybe some of the proponents have overhyped it, and I'm sure some of the proponents of AI have overhyped it. But in the call center, we saw up to 35% productivity improvements. In software, in some cases, we've seen 50% or more productivity improvements. In sales, management consulting, there are studies that they're on my website, you can read about them, where in particular applications there's documented improvement, and I think there's more yet to come. But I don't think companies should just throw AI up against the wall and say, hey, let's, more AI just automatically works. That's a bad strategy. What you need to do is, as I said, do the task-based analysis and identify which are the real projects that pay off and which are the ones that are a waste of money. And they should be doing that with RPA as well. They should be doing that with traditional robotics. They should be doing that with machine learning for predictive analytics. All these categories, you've got to be data-driven and not just assume it always works or assume it always fails.
On the level of policymakers, Professor, do you feel that there is enough awareness around the globe among policymakers that AI can really take us in totally different directions?
No. I think that this is the big challenge, and one of the things, the message that I like to leave with policymakers, which is that there's no single inevitable future that AI is either going to always pay off, or that AI is going to destroy jobs, or that AI is going to lead to concentration. All of these are possible futures, but AI is a very powerful tool. And if you think about it, if you have a powerful tool, almost by definition, that means you have more power to change the world. That's what tools do. That means your choices make a bigger difference than before. So we have a lot of different paths ahead of us, one with greater productivity, more widely shared prosperity, one with many people involved, or the opposite of all those things. Policy makers need to realize that we have the initiative. It's not what AI is going to do to us, it's what choices we are going to do using AI to transform the world. And ultimately, that means we have to think hard about what are our values? What are our goals? What is it that we hope to achieve with AI? And make sure that we are steering AI in those directions rather than just blindly hoping for the best.
Please.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing the earlier example of a radiologist.
Yeah.
I think one of the big things in medical field is the problems versus purpose. Because in US, typically, we have almost the data is true. 20% of medical is misdiagnostics.
That's right.
So if that's a problem, then the purpose will be which task caused that. Then AI should solve that problem. It's a process, right? So I believe but sometimes we say, oh, AI can do many tasks. Yeah, but you have to be critical problem first. So there's a priority.
Absolutely, exactly. Once you have the task-based analysis, it's not enough just to know the task. You need to see which ones AI can do well and which ones are important to you. That's why, as I said, you need to weight them by either the time or the money or the value, and then focus. So when you go down to the task-based analysis, you can start seeing where those opportunities are ahead of you. And I think that we're moving from an era of sort of gut instinct and stories to an era of data-driven decision-making. And that's going to unlock a huge amount of value. I mean, literally, there's going to be trillions of dollars of value created, and some of it's even unmeasured, like in healthcare, of greater longevity and greater health span.
It's a question from the gentleman in the back.
Right there in the back next to you.
Thank you. One question on, you mentioned productivity, and I think we all have high hopes. There's a colleague of yours, Darren Acemoglu, who he came up with a paper which is quite interesting, which kind of comes out with adding up these examples of where one sees already progress in productivity. He adds it all up and he says it's actually quite underwhelming.
Right.
I would like to hear a reaction to it.
Sure.
And related to this, and which you just mentioned to the question of the gentleman, there's already a big hype. You said there are going to be trillions of gained in these industries, and the markets seem to anticipate all of this.
That's right.
And this is obviously another session to make a call on markets, but nevertheless, are you concerned, and I know your research, how long these gaps are timing-wise, that the hype is, in particular in the market, is already discounting all of this in prices?
Well, I'm not going to make stock market predictions, but first let me say that Darren Acemoglu is a dear friend of mine, a great man. He also, I mentioned 2 Nobel Prize winners. Darren also got the Nobel Prize last week, so everyone's getting it except for me. I'm a big fan of his work, and we've had many discussions about AI and other things. I do disagree with him on this particular study about the impacts. I won't get too much into the technical details, but he goes through the ways that AI could affect and he kind of assumes no additional progress, that there's no additional implementation. And he also, there's a number of judgments you have to make, and in my view, each time he chooses the most pessimistic possible interpretation of these different areas. We're already beginning to see the glimmers of some productivity, but I put my money where my mouth is. So I put a bet, and there's a site called longbets.com where you can place any bet, and Bob Gordon, another economist who's a pessimist, thought that productivity would be slow over the next 10 years. I said it's going to be higher. So we have a bet on longbets.com about what productivity is going to be in the 2020s, and I guess we're going to find out in a few years who's right about that. But my bet is backed up by a lot of the research I did with Anton Koronek and with Martin Bailey and with Daniel Rock and others. And part of it is because I think not only the technologies we already have are in place, but we're beginning to see the business innovation needed to harvest them. And I'm trying to shorten that time by showing people the task-based approach. So maybe I'm cheating by trying to boost the productivity and teach companies how they can harvest it a lot faster. To the last part of your question, sometimes these lags can be very long. Electricity and the steam engine had decades between the introduction of the technology and when it actually paid off. With AI, I think it can be much shorter. The markets are anticipating that. And part of the reason is that AI can be used, all of you can use AI. I hope you're all using it already, like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, because it doesn't require special training. You can just talk to it in natural language like English. And that's why many of these sites in the call center, it was just 3 to 4 months before we started seeing some productivity gains. But I anticipate that the productivity gains are going to be significant, and I've talked to people at the Congressional Budget Office and elsewhere that these payoffs will be quite large.
I'm told that we've gone way over our time. Thank you so much. I encourage you all to continue the conversation outside with the professor. Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.